Eddie, what's up? Just before we get running here, I'm going to give you the choice. Do you want a joke or do you want a pre-show quid pro quo?
Let's do a joke.
Sure, a joke. All right, here's my joke. Ready? What did the devil say when he finally went completely bald?
What's that?
They'll be hell to pay. Hell to pay. Jeez.
That's so bad.
It is. But you asked for it, and I hope that I delivered. Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Magic Is This? A podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the supernatural, the paranormal, and the weird. Today, I am joined by a very special guest by the name of Eddie. Eddie, how are you? What's going on? What's going on in your world?
Not much. It's still writing out the whole pandemic thing.
Right.
Hopefully getting the last little bit of people vaccinated, so we might be able to be kind of normal.
I hope so. Fingers crossed, man.
Normal as possible.
Right.
I mean, I am fully vaccinated at this point. It's kind of weird because after my second vaccination shot, I kept getting a prompt asking if I wanted to upgrade to Windows 10. And then I kept trying, but it kept saying outdated hardware.
I hear you.
So I think I'm too old to upgrade Windows 10 at this point.
As long as you don't have Windows 8, I think you're good.
Yeah. Ooh, that was a nightmare.
It certainly was. Eddie, I have you on the show for a very specific reason. Now, I run polls in my Patreon for what topics are going to be coming up for the podcast. And one of the very first polls that I did, and this would have been way back in October, I had a list of topics, and mostly these topics were things that I got emails about. Hey, when are you going to do this episode? And the ones that I put up were ones that people asked for a lot. And so one of these was Satanism. Now, it got some votes. It didn't get a ton of votes, but what did strike me was that in the comments section there, you said, oh, dude, you have to talk to me about Satanism. So I have to ask, before we get running here, why were you so enthusiastic about this topic, Eddie?
Because it's one of those things where I am against the misinformation of Satanism.
Okay.
Because people hear Satanism and they automatically assume, goat slaughtering and all that. And it's just like, okay, I just want to clear the air on stuff because Satanism isn't exactly what a lot of people think.
No.
I, for some reason, though I'm not affiliated with the Church of Satan, I've read enough of LaVey's writings. Okay. I'm very well tuned with it. Plus, it's just one of those things where, there was a point where I would have considered myself a Satanist, but there were several things that I never fully agreed with Satanism.
Got it.
With anything, there's faults with it.
All right. So from my own perspective, truthfully, Satanism, I think people have phases, specifically within Canada, the US, Mexico, and we'll just say the Western world, that people go through this phase of being very interested in Satanism and Anton LaVey. It never really caught my attention. I thought it was... and I'm not trying to disparage anybody's beliefs in any way. I was very young when I went through a lot of the material, but I thought it was somewhat shallow. I had a friend who had a copy of the Satanic Bible. He let me borrow it for a little bit. And yeah, it was pretty meh to me. So in this episode, I wanted to learn a little bit myself about Satanism. So that's why I've asked Eddie on the show here, because I wanted to have somebody who was boots on the ground, maybe not a card-carrying member of Satanism, but who has gone through a lot of the material of Satanism through a very interesting period of time. But before we get into it, Eddie, how do you define Satanism? What is it exactly to you?
Satanism to me is a very esoteric thing. It's not a worship of any deity. It's a worship of self.
Okay.
It's where you treat yourself as your own god.
Got it.
It's adversarial in the way that it goes against a lot of the tenures of major organized religions, but it's an atheistic view.
Got it.
That instead of looking at an afterlife you're doing for you now instead of trying to set yourself up for what you do after you die.
Got it. That's wonderful. Through most of the material that I went through, this seemed to be somewhat currently the worldview that is held by a lot of people who do call themselves Satanists.
Yes. There's still some parts of it that I believe in truly, but then there are parts of it that I'm just kind of like, nah, that's not me anymore.
Wonderful. We'll go through it for sure. But before we get rolling here, I'm just going to ask perhaps for a little bit of breadth, basically, to go through just a really short history of Satanism. Does that sound good, Eddie?
Yeah.
Perfect. So our idea of Satanism is actually fairly new as far as being a designation or a self-description. So this is going to be a little bit of the history of Satanism before the 20th century. And again, this is going to be very brief and not comprehensive in any way. But I think it's safe to say, and through a lot of the material that I went through for Satanism, and truthfully, there's some really great books that I'll have up in the show notes for this one. Like, I've actually learned a ton, and it's really quite interesting. I was very surprised. But what these authors all agree on is that it seems to be a Christian polemic. So that is something that is used to describe others, truthfully. The devil itself was a bit of a non-entity until about the 12th and 13th century. And in and around that point, the devil becomes this really fearsome figure. To say that somebody was in league with the devil was anybody that the Christians didn't like, be they people that they described as pagans or Jews. It was really something that Christians would label somebody else with. It was the view of Christians for a large swath of time that pagans, which is a term I'm not too happy about, but they weren't worshiping their gods. They were actually worshiping demons. They just didn't know that they were worshiping demons, and it was the Christians' job to write this for them. Satanism was a tool of persecution first and foremost, and it came into this idea of being able to scapegoat, which fulfilled a societal function at the time. It wasn't the only thing that Satanism was known for, but this is something that you see even to this day, right, Eddie? Like this idea of othering people with the use of the term Satan?
Oh, absolutely. A cheap cop-out to label somebody that you don't agree with. It's like also like calling someone that you don't agree with like Hitler, right, or they're endorsing tyranny.
Right. Yeah. Some habits die hard. They really do.
Yeah. And what a lot of people don't realize is like the term Satan is Latin for adversary.
Right. Yeah.
That's just kind of a cool word, adversary, if you think about it.
100%. I think that's something that people that later on called themselves Satanists, they really latched onto that. Now, people don't tend to realize that heresy for I'm just going to say churchianity, it was a big deal. It was a huge deal, and it was used for constant persecution throughout time. Now, what happened with the Protestant Reformation is that something very odd occurred where you had both sides, both Protestants and Catholics, accusing each other of being in league with Satan and with the devil, which is really quite fun, but also terrifying. Tons of people died. It's really bad. You have the witch trials from the 15th to the 18th century. I'm not going to go into that too much because it's an episode. It's a podcast, basically. Somebody could do a whole podcast about the witch trials. In fact, I think somebody has. There's way too much detail to go into here, but for our purposes, self-describing as a Satanist in a way began with a poem. And this would be John Milton's Paradise Lost. Have you read Paradise Lost at all, Eddie?
It's been a long time, but yes, I have.
It's a very, very cool book.
John Milton just had a wild imagination.
Absolutely. He was blind, I believe, and so he only had his imagination. The story, or the poem itself, has two main arcs. One dealing with the story of Adam and Eve and the fall from paradise. But the one that we're going to concentrate on is the one about basically Satan / Lucifer having been defeated and banished to hell. Satan / Lucifer, in a way, was portrayed as almost admirable or even a sympathetic character. Now, there's a lot of scholarly debates as to whether or not this was done on purpose. It's really tough to say because it did happen a long time ago. But with this poem, Paradise Lost, it got taken up by a group or a movement called Romanticism, which, as it spread everywhere through all circles of art, people certainly saw a romantic element in the story of the devil. So, to begin with, Satan, in a way, was descriptive of those who had a more atheistic view of religion. As Eddie said a little bit earlier, the mid-18th century had something called the Hellfire Club, which was Sir Francis Dashwood. Most would consider these not to be like overly satanic. They consider these more like atheist rakes where people were cheekily toasting each other and toasting the devil at the same time. It sounds like a pretty fun thing. We don't know a ton about what happened at Hellfire meetings, but yeah, as a philosophy, Satanism found home with artists for the most part, as it does. And the first person to really, really hone in on this idea of being satanic, I mean, there's people before this, but somebody like Baudelaire, who was alleged to be satanic, but it was just because a lot of his lifestyle was using drugs and stuff like that. But the person that we can really point to that started self-describing as a Satanist and meant it was Stanislaw Przybyszewski. Have you heard of this guy?
I've heard the name, but I have not done any research. Admittedly, that's my mistake right there.
It's all good. I try not to give my guests homework before having them on the show. I just think it keeps things fresh. Stanislaw was Polish, I believe. He wrote. He was a dramatist. He was part of the symbolist movement. His brand of Satanism was, I'm going to say it was fairly nihilistic, with a huge lashing of social Darwinism more than anything else. Going from Stanislav, you have other figures like Eliphas Levi, who, of course, with his Baphomet picture that each and every one of us know, Baphomet's also huge amongst Satanists as well. For Eliphas Levi, Lucifer was a positive figure. He just saw the devil as the Romantics saw it as well. But one thing that constantly gets trotted out is that, and it's constant, it's all the time, anytime he's brought up in any kind of a movie, is the fact that people say that Aleister Crowley, the Great Beast 666, was a Satanist. This is not true. There's court transcripts. You had to go to court once, and people asked him, like, are you in league with the devil? And Crowley just basically said, no. He never accepted the Christian worldview at any stage. Like, so why would he be a devil worshiper? It's just not him. But you constantly hear that Aleister Crowley, Satanist. And my eyes roll into the back of my head so fast. Can somebody please just give these people a book? Anyways, his diabolical posturing, as well as aspects of Thelema, would be highly influential for Satanists later. Somebody who I talked about not too long ago on my Sex Magic episode, Maria Didnogloska. She wrote a lot about Satan, and she had a satanic philosophy that was very idiosyncratic. But what you were seeing is pretty much all of these figures after Milton is this idea being attached to Satan. And that is this idea of rebellion, pure and simple. And so with that, we must head to the one figure who put all of this together and really solidified the philosophy of Satanism. Eddie, who is Anton Szandor LaVey?
Anton Szandor LaVey is the founder of what is known as the Church of Satan. Essentially, he basically was, for all intents and purposes, LaVey was a giant showman.
Okay.
He was almost like a P.T. Barnum character.
Yeah.
He found a book called Might is Right, written by Ragnar Redbeard, and essentially rewrote it to become the Satanic Bible.
Right.
But throughout his life, he had done a lot of stuff. He was a crime scene photographer. He was an accomplished organist.
Yeah.
He would play in the carnival, and late nights on Saturdays, he would be playing like the vaudeville shows or like the strip shows. And then the next morning, he would see all the same faces rolling into the church.
Right.
And he was just like, okay, so last night was about sin. This morning is about your redemption.
Yeah.
So he saw the hypocrisy behind that. It boggled his mind that people would not embrace their carnal desires.
Got it.
It was 1966 on May Day that officially announced the formation of the Church of Satan. And then in 1971, he released the Satanic Bible.
Got it.
There's a lot of stories behind that one. He was on talk shows all the time, like some of the people that were affiliated with the Church of Satan, and even just speculated. Because early on, like Sammy Davis Jr., who would have thought that? Jane Mansfield.
Right.
He was kind of a Hollywood, he was almost like the member of the Rat Pack that were devil's horns.
Right.
And he ate it up. The one thing that he despised was the hypocrisy of the church.
Right.
That was the main sticking point, was he said, I'm just going to point a sharp, shitty stick in anything I can. And it worked. Because here we are years later, and Satanism now, you hear Satanism everywhere.
Yeah, you still do.
He left a legacy behind him. But he was just a really interesting character. Like, he had a pet lion.
A panther or something like that. Yeah. He drove around in a hearse too, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Like, everything that people think were cool back then and do now, he pretty much did. He also was not a fan of weakness.
No.
He was actually a very light drinker. He hated drug abusers.
Yeah.
But also the Church of Satan was the first religious organization to openly welcome lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. And another little fun fact about them is they are the only church in America that actually pays taxes.
I didn't know that, really.
Yeah. They also they're not affiliated with any political stance.
Right. They stay out of that game, yeah.
They believe that it's an individualist way of thinking.
For sure.
Because I've known quite a few actual members
of the Church of Satan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They all think differently. There are some that are very right-wing, some that are very left-leaning. So there's no core political thinking with them. My big introduction to Satanism, other than like growing up listening to heavy metal,
nice,
was I grew up outside of Baltimore. The big record store in Baltimore City that we would go to buy punk rock and that was called Reptilian Records.
Nice.
And the owner there, Chris X, was a member of the Church of Satan. And every so often, he would do a show called A Tribute to Satan. And he would just bring in these great bands. And it was a night of complete mayhem and hedonism, like stuff being destroyed, like Bibles being burned, the whole 9 yards.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it's just like
the place to be.
Yeah, pretty much. Like some of those nights were monumental. Me, like a lot of kids, bought the Satanic Bible and just carried it around because it was just like, it looked cool.
Right.
But I had never really read it until my early 20s.
Yeah.
Like a little bit, probably like my mid-20s.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, there's some really good life advice in here.
Right.
And some of the philosophies I still apply.
For sure. I think for any figure that I've covered for this show, going through the life of Anton LaVey was incredibly frustrating. There are so many legends, and Anton fed them. As you said, he was a showman. He had one of his list of influences as P.T. Barnum, right? So he allowed these legends to just accrue over his mystique. And at base, the one thing that everybody says that knew Anton was that he was an incredibly charismatic person. I don't know if we could call his life just a slew of lies, but a lot of the things that he talks about, after people do some checking up on them, they turn out not to be true. He said that he slept with Marilyn Monroe, and he allowed these things to just keep building up on him. But one thing that I think that is very interesting about LaVey is that he is definitely sincere in what he believed. He was one of those figures that, had he not been born, America would have had to invent him.
Yes.
He was so of his time and of an embodiment of the hypocrisy of what we call the American dream. And he was in it.
There's a certain part of the Church of Satan that goes along with other things that went against, like, the New Age movement, and that from that era, like the Discordians, the Church of the Subgenius, the Cacophony Society. I think that it was a way of trying to get people to stop being dullards.
Right. You found the Church of Satan in 1966, correct?
Yes.
It had at one point, I think, something like 10,000 card-carrying members, and maybe the mid-70s. But I have to ask you, Eddie, because there's so many different kinds of Satanism. You have theistic Satanism. There's Luciferianism, which is kind of not the same thing. It's a little different, and there could literally be an episode about Luciferianism. But Eddie, what makes LaVeyan Satanism distinct? Is it just the things like the 9 satanic statements and the 9 sins? Like, what is...
I think for him, you take a mix of the philosophies of, like, Ayn Rand,
right,
H.L. Mencken. You take, like, objectivism, and it's a selfish religion.
Yeah.
It's like you take. If you want it, get it.
Right.
As long as it's legal.
Okay.
Which is, and that's the big thing that they stress, is we don't endorse stealing, but it's a very materialistic way of thinking.
Yeah.
If you want to spend money on that, then go ahead and do it. You only live once. In some ways, as much as I hate saying this, it's a very YOLO kind of a way of thinking, where it's just like, okay, you want that $500 pair of shoes?
Right.
Buy them. I think for a lot of people, it's empowering in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
He did do pretty well with the selling copies of the Satanic Bible. Like, I was literally checking earlier today the Amazon charts for best-selling occult books. It's always number 1 or number 2. It's either that or the Kabbalion. Like, it's still, to this day, just sells tons and tons of copies.
Oh, yeah. The thing is, it's one of those books that kind of a monumental piece of American writing.
Exactly. I think so. Yeah, I'd agree with you.
Honestly, if you really think about the longevity of it, it might be the only religion created in America that never really did anything that ended up being on the news for something bad.
Well,
yeah.
We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But something that you brought up earlier is this idea of it is a fairly atheistic religion. It's not accepting of the idea of there being a benefic or malefic God in any way. It's just that the Satan is somewhat more material. Would you agree with this? Like that at base, LaVeyan Satanism is downright atheistic?
They're not a fan of agnosticism, which is where I kind of branch off from, because I used to be militant atheist.
Right.
And now I've more adapted myself to Robert Anton Wilson's maybe.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah. I mean, it took me a long time to get there, but for myself personally, I'm finding the older I get, the less I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that 100%. What's strange, though, about LaVey is that he says like he doesn't believe in any kind of like deities, and yet he was a huge fan of the occult.
Yeah.
He loved the idea of magic and the occult. And he did that thing where he said that it's just something that science doesn't understand yet. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
LaVey has some very strange ideas. He was into eugenics. I think that's just like as a consequence of living a fairly materialistic existence and taking materialism as like the be all and end all. But it's strange that he was such a huge fan of magic. So I have to ask Eddie, what is satanic magic as promulgated by Anton LaVey?
I kind of think satanic magic is more the Nietzschean thinking of the will to power.
Okay.
If you will something, you can make it happen.
Right.
Maybe even a precursor to chaos magic.
Yeah, I think that there are some figures that were into chaos magic that were definitely into the ideas that Anton LaVey was talking about, for sure.
They do in some accords, like there are some similarities.
LaVey has this thing where he splits magic into two parts, it seems. And there's like greater magic and lesser magic. So greater magic are things like rituals. A lot of this is cribbed from Aleister Crowley. But for LaVey, it was about psychodramatic catharsis, right? It was that showman comes up again in LaVey, and it's about the energy that is like created from doing these dramas. And for LaVey, lesser magic was more applied self-psychology. One of my favorite things that I read recently about Anton LaVey was from Carl Abrahamson, who champions Anton LaVey, but more specifically his contributions to magic, in a book that he has called Occulture. There's a very good chapter on Anton LaVey, and if people are interested, please seek this book out. Anton did some strange stuff with magic, though. He knew about John Dee and Edward Kelly. He said that he did the Enochian keys, but he replaced one of the deities with Satan in there. He also said that because of scrying, that Dee and Kelly were working with optics more than anything. And I don't buy this at all, but he said that what they meant to say were angles, as in angles of light, as opposed to angels. And it's just like, I don't know about that, Anton. That's a bit of a stretch. But at base, I think that his brand of magic, at least from what I was able to read, it's about utilizing our own qualities, right? If you read any of his books about magic, but more specifically his book, The Satanic Witch, it's very fun. And I think it's actually worth a read, at least once. It's him. Like, I don't know if we could call him a feminist, but he was definitely better than a lot of figures at his time with treating women as they're having their own agency, for sure. The Satanic Witch has things in there about using your body in a way to bewitch people, to get them to do things that you want, right? So this is all part of the way that Anton looked at magic. The word that comes up a lot with his magic is this idea of ego. So for LaVey, there's this idea of the things that other people think about you. And then there is kind of like as Eddie mentioned, like your eloquent will, otherwise known as the ego, with its libidinal and compensatory forces. Anton thought that one could utilize this in some way to have things happen. And for Anton, it was just like, we don't understand it yet. Science can't explain these forces, but these forces are real. Which, I mean, kind of having his cake and eating it too, in a way. Like, I'm not saying that all magic has to be spiritual, but for Anton, he was just like, cut the spiritual out. A lot of this is just about you, yourself, and your capabilities. But what I do like is that he did bring a lot of humor into what he did. Archetypes were big for Anton LaVey, and this idea of being a joker or a trickster is a very powerful one, but also for being able to laugh at things almost in that Discordian way, to be able to see the foolishness and the hypocrisy of others. Eddie, what's this thing with having artificial human beings? Do you know about this?
No,
Yeah.
that's That one's new to me.
Yeah, somebody in the Discord server for What Magic Is has brought it up, and I had to do a little bit of looking at it. But yeah, it's kind of like a precursor to, I guess, like real dolls. He would think that people should have like an artificial human companion. He said some weird out there stuff.
I mean, everybody has their weirdness about them.
Absolutely.
So going back and touching on LaVey's feminism, one of the major trains of thought of Satanism is the mutual respect of somebody's body.
Right.
If you find someone attractive, that's cool, but you don't make a move on them until you know that it's okay. So that's a huge thing right there. And you point that out to someone who isn't well versed in Satanism at all. That one blows their mind quite a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, so they're not just about like taking what you want? And it's just like, no, not at all. So I think that there was a huge respect for women there. You watch like a video of a black mass. Like there is one really good video out there of an actual black mass, and they're just naked people laying everywhere. I don't know his philanderings or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that he indulged quite a bit because, I mean, it is a celebration of indulgence.
That we know of, he had like 3 very close partners throughout his life.
Yes.
But he was also a very charismatic man.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I think is most interesting about Anton LaVey's magic, or at least his magical philosophies, is this idea of total environment. Now, I love this. Total environment for Anton LaVey was a controlled space possessing aesthetics aligned with highly idiosyncratic whims of the one who creates it. So it's a space that produces experiences. It's a complete immersion in these spaces. Now, LaVey didn't create this, but he was really good at being able to put it down into words that would make things very digestible for people. And I just love this idea of total environment. Magicians, we don't have our temples any longer, so we have to make our own. And this is something that LaVey understood completely. And in a way, I think it is the key to Anton LaVey's magic in a way. This idea of total environment is basically a space that is not only you, but it has your aims, your ambitions, everything in one spot. Also, one of my patrons in the Discord was talking about how doing something almost like a total environment has been shown to help people that are suffering from Alzheimer's and having trouble remembering things.
Yeah.
The space and environment is important. I mean...
It really is. And also ritual. Everybody has a ritual, whether they know it or not.
100%.
Humans are a lot more ritual based than they would like to be considered.
Absolutely. And I think that goes deep down. And at base, I think that LaVey understood a lot of what he considered human nature. And a lot of times I think that he was right. Some things are complete misses when I was going through his stuff, but some of the stuff is just like, yeah, Anton definitely gets that.
It's just being the best that you can be for you and for no other purpose. Not to be attractive to people, but because it makes you feel like a god.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's definitely something to get behind.
Like with anything, there are some faults, but
always.
You know.
Can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, but...
Exactly. And then you go along, like, further on into things like Charles Manson.
Yeah.
Which they were really quick to distance themselves from that, and wisely so.
Yeah.
At that time, you had... the uprise of Scientology, and then you had the Process Church of the Final Judgment. I've been interested in the Process Church for years. Yeah. And now they're just coming to light because of that Netflix special, The Sons of Sam.
Right.
At that time, there were so many different ways of thinking that now are labeled cults.
Right. Of all those groups, the Church of Satan is almost the most benign of them.
Yeah. They're like, okay, well, you can get into that over there. We're just going to be sitting here smoking cigars, drinking fine wine, and having think tanks.
Yeah, that's it.
And probably orgies.
Well, you got to have a little bit of that.
You never knew what happened to the walls of the Black House, but if those walls could talk, they probably had some stories.
Eddie, I got to ask you, because this just came to mind for me, but the Black House, can you describe it first? But also, was that his parents' house or was that his?
I believe he bought that.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't know offhand.
Okay.
Now, the Black House was his house, and it was in San Francisco, and they just painted the entire house black.
Yeah.
It was torn down to make condos for people that work in Silicon Valley.
That'll pretty much be all over the world pretty soon.
Yeah.
Anything you like is going to be condos soon.
Yeah. I mean, the Black House was the de facto house of the Church of Satan. They carried it for a few years after his death. And the people that now run the church, I forget where they run it out of. We could honestly even do an entire episode about the aftermath of Anton's passing. Because
there's a whole lot of stuff that happened there.
I honestly don't know. I'll keep up with them, but for the most part, it's they're more prevalent now than I think that they have been with the aspect of social media.
Yeah.
They have a Twitter account, and whoever runs their Twitter account loves roasting.
Well, that's nothing wrong with that. Who doesn't enjoy a good roasting?
They make valid points.
Yeah.
The thing about the Church of Satan is they were never outgoing about getting members.
Right.
They never did any recruitment drives.
No.
They let people come to them. You had to apply to join.
Right.
I think the application fee is $200, but you're not guaranteed to get in.
Right.
It's not like you send in $200 and they send you the kid and they're just like, congratulations.
Right.
You have to prove your worthiness to be a member.
Interesting.
The Church of the Subgenius is like you send in $35 and boom.
Or you read Illuminatus and you cut out the little card in the back and you're a Discordian.
Yeah, exactly. Or we could make each other popes right now and then excommunicate each other.
As one does.
Yeah, absolutely. They won't release the numbers that they have.
No.
They're secretive in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They're social, but also behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It's very secretive. So, I mean, you would have to really dig deep and get a higher up member or somebody who, like a high ranking member. But even then, I think you would have a hard time getting stories out of them because there's a lot of people on social media that will just attack straight up.
There were some schisms that occurred as well. So to go on a little bit of more history here, as Eddie mentioned, Anton was on a lot of talk shows. I believe he was on Jimmy Carson at one point.
Johnny Carson.
Sorry, Johnny Carson, yes. Yeah.
Donahue's show.
Yeah. He did a lot of public engagement. Everybody wanted to talk to the Black Pope. In the mid-'70s, a couple of things happened. One of I believe he was an editor for the newspaper or the newsletter that the Church of Satan produced, a gentleman by the name of Michael Aquino. He separated from the Church of Satan, just disagreeing with a lot of stuff, and he started the Temple of Set, which is their own thing. I'm not going to talk about it too much. But Anton was making an okay bucks with the Satanic Bible, and he retreated from public life in the mid-'70s. And as things do, things progress. For a while, the Church of Satan was just another thing. It was seen for many people to be, like a youthful expression thumbing its nose at authority. How bad can it be? It was basically what a lot of people were said at the time. How bad could it be if Sammy Davis Jr. was a member of this thing briefly?
Yeah.
But it did occupy a part of the Western psyche that goes across the board, which was the point in a way, basically. But for the Church of Satan and for Satanism in general, theistic or otherwise, things get very dark. All it took was time and hysteria. So which are basically the same thing historically that Satanism was used for. It was used as a polemic. I just want to talk for a little bit here, because I think we have to. It's going to be about the Satanic Panic. Now, this is another Canadian gift, not unlike putting pineapple on pizza, so you're welcome, everybody. Yes, we did that. It started in the late 70s in Victoria, British Columbia, which is like the least satanic Canadian city of all time. It's really beautiful. I was there last September. It's such a fantastic place. There's two individuals that kind of started this whole ball rolling, and that would be psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder. Now, one of his patients who he was helping, Michelle Smith, some things occurred between these two. Michelle was depressed. She went to Pasder for help with this. She had some trauma from a recent miscarriage that she had, but she also said that she had trauma from something that she doesn't know about or something that she's forgotten. And so Lawrence Pasder did something called recovered memory therapy, which was using hypnosis to be able to try and dig into some people's past or their past traumas. What happens is 14 months and 600 hours of hypnosis later, there were some extremely unsettling things that came up. Now, small segments of these things Pasder had published in People magazine as well as the National Enquirer, and he released on November 1st, 1980, a book called Michelle Remembers. Eddie, have you ever read this book?
No, I actually own a copy,
okay,
but I have not gotten around to it.
You have to read it, man.
Like, I've done the Wikipedia Cliff Notes version of it.
Yeah.
But it's one of those books that I'm like, okay, I got to get to that. And then something else will pop out at me.
You kind of already know the story because it is, at base, is like a template for what we saw in the Satanic Panic, right? Like it's got everything in there. It's got satanic rituals. It's got children being sacrificed. It's got people being kept in metal cages, rape, sexual assault, using blood and people's body parts for certain things. At one point, yes, Satan is evoked over a series of days. I think like 80 days or something like that. Jesus shows up. The Virgin Mary shows up. Archangel Michael shows up and takes away Michelle's scars from all the horrible trauma and beatings and assaults that she suffered. Man,
that's a busy 80 days.
Yeah, dude. Like would I suggest people read it? I don't think I would. I think we all know the story because if you're an old geezer like Eddie and myself, we've kind of heard all of this already. But
yeah,
it really comes off though as a psychiatrist who did something that everybody kind of knew was shady as far as the hypnosis and then just really capitalizing on it. I'm not saying I don't think that he wasn't sincere or Michelle wasn't sincere, but Michelle had some trauma, but what she said happened wasn't the trauma. Michelle Remembers became like the textbook for satanic ritual abuse. Pasder became like an authority on satanic ritual abuse. Yeah. So the satanic ritual abuse stuff, it was out in the open, but it took time to snowball, and it snowballed somewhat quickly. We have a lot of very strange circumstances that go into this phenomena. And a lot of it had to do with orienting goals for social workers and police officers investigating abuse. And a lot of the techniques that they were used were very coercive. They were not light investigations into people's past. And a lot of the people that we were talking to were mentally ill already, or they were children. They were children that they were talking to. And this was all about getting results for social workers and police officers. And we all know that kids will say anything. And they did. So you have a ton of things like the McMartin preschool trial. You have Kern County. Man, have you, Eddie, I got to ask, like, do you remember what it was like living in these times?
Oh, yeah. Like, just about every parent was on edge.
Yeah.
It never hit home, but my mom was a daycare provider at that
Seriously?
time. Yeah, but she worked out of our house.
Okay.
So parents would come in, and I mean, there were 3 women on our street that did daycare, and they were all friends. So after that, like the actual like daycare centers, people were trying to pull their kids out and put them in like the independently owned ones with people that they knew or had good reputations.
Yeah.
It was just a weird time because it was like the end of the Cold War. So America needed another boogeyman. Yeah. And the Satanic Panic came out at just the right time. Yeah. I mean, you see the Satanic Panic rehashing itself every few years under another name. Yeah. It's like right now, well, not as much as it was in like the past few years, but the whole QAnon phenomenon. Okay. Because that followed a lot of the steps where it's just like, okay, well, Hollywood's liberal elite is harvesting trafficked children to slaughter for their satanic purposes to harvest adrenochrome to live forever because they're reptoid life forms.
Yeah, is that what that's about?
Yeah. And everybody was just like, oh my God, like the liberal elite are stealing children. And I'm like, okay. And basically, like, I try to be as skeptical as possible.
Of course. Yeah.
And I'm watching these videos, and the way that they present themselves is they're grandstanding. They're like, our children are being trafficked. Billions of children a year go missing. Right. And I'm like, okay, noble cause. And then you get down to the bottom, and they're like, it always boils down to the same thing with the conspiracy theorists. Right. It's the Jews doing it. And I'm just like, here we go. Yeah. That was the one that I was waiting for. As soon as I see that, I'm like, X out of video, and that one's done.
Do you remember, though, to get back to the Satanic Panic, do you remember just how it was everywhere, man? I lived out in the country, and I had like maybe 2 television channels, but anytime you go into the city or to a supermarket, it's on the front. It was like every paper.
Oh, yeah.
Everything.
Everything from like People magazine down to the National Enquirer, the Weekly World News. Like, I think the Weekly World News suffered the most because there's only so many Bat Boy articles that they can run. It was everywhere. It was on every major talk show. Yeah. I mean, Geraldo. I don't remember if Oprah had
Oprah had on Lawrence Pastor. She actually had Lawrence Pastor on, to talk about that shit. Dude, nobody was without this. It sells, and it was a concern for people. It really was. They thought it was completely real.
That's the problem is so many people were ruined in that.
Lives completely ruined. Going through all of McMartin Preschool, Kern County, West Memphis 3, so many people's lives were just completely raked over the coals for this shit.
Yeah, and I mean, look at Damien Eccles now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he went from being a victim of the Satanic Panic to one of the bigger names in magic. I don't know him, but I know several people that know him personally and just say, like, you would never think in a million years that was the same kid on the Paradise Lost series.
Documentaries, yeah.
That was convicted and put on death row.
Yeah. And abused every day while he was in jail. Like, just...
Yeah.
Unbelievably tragic. Yeah. Such a phenomenon, but you have a bunch of things also feeding into it. It wasn't just daycares. You also have serial killers like Richard Ramirez, who terrified. People were so scared of him, even when he was in prison or going through trial. Like, I don't remember, because I believe he was arrested in and around the time when I was like 1 year old, but images of his trial and the things that he was doing while he was in jail were always on papers as well. That picture of him with the pentagram in his palm, like, it gets fucked up, and people forget this. It lasted so long. It lasted a good 15 years. The Satanic Panic. The biggest one that I remember in Canada was Martinsville in Saskatchewan. There was like 2 cases involving one a foster care home and another one a daycare center. That happened in 1992. That was late in the Satanic Panic, and it was all a hoax. People countersued. It was insanity. But here's the weird thing, though, is that this machine that creates hysteria also creates monsters. Now, there's people that were at the time, and there are isolated incidents. It's nothing as much as, say, what Michelle Smith talked about in Michelle Remembers, but there were people that copycatted this shit and actually like did try to do their own satanic rituals. It got fucked up, like in the same way that we see when there's a school shooting or any kind of a mass shooting in the US, there's always copycats that come around after. But this monster that was created by the mass media actually created people that thought that they were doing satanic rituals.
Yeah.
It was insane. So it's like ask for the devil and he shall appear kind of stuff. I forget where I read it, but some investigative journalist was raking through reports of items that were confiscated from the homes of murderers. And right up at the top, the Satanic Bible.
It was exactly. See, that's the thing is, like I said about this is I wish people would spend the $10 and just buy the Satanic Bible and read it and find out it's not what people think it is. Because people are expecting like, oh, you know, where's the chapter on goat sacrifice? Right. A lot of people don't realize like they view animal cruelty as a cardinal sin.
100%.
I'm pretty much a lifelong vegetarian.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't believe in animal cruelty. When I read that, I was just like, okay, I'm okay with that. They don't believe in the harming of the animal unless you're utilizing it. You don't do it out of malice.
Absolutely.
You know, so
this book became, the object itself was viewed as being evil. And so just owning it was evil, but you flip through it and it's like, this is pretty benign stuff.
Like, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, come on. It's a black book.
Yeah.
And in red letterings, it says the Satanic Bible and Anton Szandor LaVey. Yeah. Like, it's one of the most iconic covers for a book ever.
Definitely.
In how simplistic it is.
Yeah.
But then you read it, and then there are things that really, if you have your problems, don't throw them out at other people.
No.
Keep to yourself. If somebody comes into your home and disrespects you, kick them out.
Yeah.
Like,
very simple stuff.
Yeah, show them no mercy.
Right.
Don't turn the other cheek. Smash theirs.
Right.
You know, not physically all the time, but if you're well read enough, you should be able to verbally do it. But now you have these offshoot groups.
Right.
just started calling mall-bred Satanism.
We'll get into this shortly, but I just want to say the reason I brought up the Satanic Panic and why it kind of gets tied in here is, as I mentioned earlier, Anton was almost like nowhere to be found. He went AWOL in the mid-70s, and all of this stuff, I think, it didn't impress him at all. He thought it was like, immediately it was bullshit. He had his daughter, Xena, try to debunk a lot of it. She went on a bunch of talk shows. Those turned into gong shows. Like, it was... The 80s was fucked up, but
yeah.
Anton, he just stayed out of it, and good for him, truthfully. Yeah, it took its time. Eventually, the dust settled in and around 1995. Things just kind of get back to normal a little bit. Hysteria always just kind of winds itself out, but it does bubble up in its ways, albeit, smaller instances in ways that Eddie has mentioned. In 1997, Anton LaVey, he dies, and he dies in a Catholic hospital, which is something that no doubt he was amused by. More copies of the Satanic Bible, it just shoots through the roof. Like, when he died, more copies of the Satanic Bible got sold. Since then, it's been a lot of these offshoot groups making a lot of noise. So I have to ask you, Eddie, what is the Satanic Temple?
Okay, so the Satanic Temple is a group of people who are trying to bring Satanism more mainstream.
Okay.
To me, they're basically a performance art group.
Okay.
Somebody who I'm acquainted with was one of the people who helped the formation of the Satanic Temple.
Oh, really? Okay.
A gentleman by the name of Shane Bugbee.
Okay.
Who, Shane, if you're listening, hi. How they came to prominence was their leader, a guy named Lucian Greaves.
Right.
Did a gay mass and turned the founder of the Westboro Baptist Church's parents gay posthumously.
Got it.
It was like a media spectacle.
Okay.
At root, you look at it and you're like, okay, they're doing some stuff, like they're very active for reproductive rights.
Okay.
Admirable. Very active in getting the separation of church and state in America, making it absolute. I just found this out last night. They have another group called the Sober Faction, which is for people that are recovering from drug and alcohol addictions, which are all admirable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But also at the same time, they're making it cutesy.
I see. You have a problem with the cutesy.
Yeah, like I don't need a plush Baphomet like crocheted doll. There's a lot of stuff that is just like, okay, but they just kind of take it too far. And the one tenet of Satanism that I've always appreciated is they would not accept an application from someone interested who was under the age of 18.
Okay.
Because they did not advocate indoctrination of children into anything.
This is the Church of Satan.
Yes, the Church of Satan.
All right.
The Satanic Temple made coloring books for children to distribute in schools in Florida who were being taught creationism.
Got it.
And that, to me, it was just kind of like, no, don't do that. Like, child's mind is very impressionable. And that's where they kind of lost me. And then, like, there's certain clothing companies that are involved with the Satanic Temple, one of which is called Blackcraft Cult.
Okay.
And they have the worst graphic designers humanly possible. But They sell shit at the mall that just like, think for yourself, be different. And it's just like, okay, you're buying that shit at the mall 3 times the price of what you should pay for it. It doesn't have the individuality aspect that I appreciate about the Church of Satan.
Do you think that LaVey would have liked Satanic Temple, or because in a way that's kind of like beating the system at its own game for selling these things, or just doing like, maybe he might have just been like somewhat curious about it. But what do you think?
Oh man, the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple do not get along.
Oh really?
No.
Okay.
Peter Gilmore has basically said, we want nothing to do with them.
Okay.
We don't even want them to call themselves Satanists.
Got it. What's with people just calling themselves Satanists these days? Like, I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, but every once in a while I'll listen to a podcast, and it's usually not about magic, but they'll just say like, oh yes, I'm a Satanist. And they'll happen to be the most milquetoast, boring person ever. Like, what is it? Satanism, is it now just a term to say that you're a fundamental materialist and like when you die nothing happens? Is that where we're at right now?
I think it's a way to try and be shocking.
Okay. It's not working.
The problem these days is nothing is shocking anymore. Hell, saying that you're a compassionate person with a load of empathy for humanity is more shocking than saying that you're a Satanist. Like I said, like, the older I get, the less I know. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding out that it's just like, I'm comfortable with admitting to that now. Yeah. I went for years being like, oh, okay, well, you know, I'm the smartest person in the room. Right. To me being like, I am nothing more than a primate with a heightened intellect.
That's right.
And especially the more technology advances and the more cords that come out for stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, if people saw me trying to plug in a USB port, they would just be like, okay, how did this guy make it this far in life? You know?
Hey, man, you're hitting close to home here. I struggle with USB ports as well.
Yeah. And I know it's a struggle for a lot of people, but a lot of people won't admit it. It's just like, when you hit that USB port right the first time, you're like, glorious. Okay. Yeah. So, but it's also like how things change. It's like a lot of my opinions on stuff have changed. And honestly, like, a lot of it has to do since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Like, I used to argue on Facebook all the time.
Right.
Now I'm just like, why bother? You know, like, for a few years, I ran a satire page on Facebook, My Town's Local Government.
Okay.
I mean, it was actually wildly popular.
Good.
But I put it to rest. I made it a point to keep it apolitical. Right. Like, not choosing sides, nothing.
Right.
And it just got down to a point where I'm like, I can't even have fun with this anymore.
No.
Because satire is dying.
I would agree. Well, who needs satire when the world's as it is right now?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't even, like, there's going to be a point and we're just going to see a headline from The Onion that says, we can't think of anything more ridiculous than real life can.
Yeah.
And it's sad because I grew up on, like, Mad Magazine, and there's just no place to it. Like, when they announced that they were shutting down Mad Magazine, I was just like, damn, that's another part of my upbringing gone.
100%. Yeah.
With everything, things change, but like you were saying, like, people that call themselves Satanists, it doesn't hold the same water.
No.
Being older, you remember back in the day, to buy these books, we didn't have Amazon.
No.
We had to seek them out.
Yep.
I remember getting excited to go to Atomic Books in Baltimore and seeing what books and zines they had.
Right.
Some record shops had a small book section. It's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, what are they going to have? Or like when we started getting a Barnes and Noble or whatever.
Right.
Even though like their sections on like the occult are pretty small and like
they are.
I'm going to be the first one to admit there's a lot more badly written books about the occult than there are good ones.
I agree. I totally agree.
So it's just like, if I can't follow it in the first 100 pages, you're consigned to the pile.
Right. Yeah.
Anybody can do a little bit of Google research and find out everything.
Yep.
And even like people that I'm friends with from back in that era, it was all about the discovery.
There's the journey. Yeah.
You saw something cool on a bookshelf somewhere and you were like, I'm going to pick that up.
Yeah.
Icons are hard to come by.
I'd agree.
Because attention spans are low.
I think you've just tabled the long, slow death of the Western world there.
Yeah. And as somebody who loves like crackpot history and that, I mean, this year for Halloween, I'm going to go as like my favorite historical person that nobody's going to know. I'm going to go as Emperor Norton.
I love Emperor Norton. It's a great guy.
Gentleman.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Emperor of the United States.
Yeah, Emperor of the United States. Like, I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's also, I love good pranks.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that's missing right now is good pranks.
People are taking things really seriously these days. It's interesting, Eddie, just to wrap up here, from my perspective and my research of this episode, and again, I wasn't really ever interested in Satanism, but what does come up to the surface for a lot of this, I can understand the appeal of Satanism. I think, and let me know if you agree, Eddie, but I think there's some major things. There's a perceived idea of liberation and individualism. There is an empowerment for those that feel alienated from not just the world, but from their families. There's an anger, a complete anger at the Christian created worldview that we find ourselves in a lot of these communities. There is the hypocrisy of the West that, of course, Satanism thumbs its nose at. But all in all, I think this comes down to this idea, and the same idea that Milton had in his poem, Paradise Lost, which is all in all rebellion. So, Eddie, I have to ask you, would you still consider yourself a Satanist today?
No.
What happened?
I'm not as selfish as I used to be.
Okay.
And especially like the events since last year have shown that I do have more compassion and empathy for people than I previously did.
Good.
I'll be the first to admit, like, from working in the restaurant industry my entire life, I've seen a lot of bad stuff out of people.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where it's like, you see the worldhood as such, and the world is actually a beautiful place.
Yeah.
But it's deeply flawed and always will be. And it's like one of my favorite quotes from a movie was the ending of Seven, when Morgan Freeman says, Ernest Hemingway said, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
Fantastic, Eddie. This has been great. I have my quibbles, especially with the way that LaVey saw magic. I think that as a consequence of LaVeyan Satanism and the materialism, just basically saying that it's something that science doesn't understand yet, while completely saying that entities don't exist, doesn't hold Well, you said earlier, hold water. I'm going to say it doesn't hold a bucket of blood for me. I think that perhaps in some deep down place, LaVey knew this. And there is this weird contradiction, especially from the release of the Satanic Bible to the release of the Satanic Witch. I think he knew this, but he wasn't going to say it. He's always winking. LaVey is always winking, and he took a lot of the things that he probably truly felt to his grave, or to his fire. He was cremated. But I like the initial impulse of Satanism. It's interesting. It's wonderful. You have figures like Mitch Horowitz these days, who is promulgating the ideas of Satanism. You have a lot of figures who are now saying that there is something to this. And I agree that there is something to Satanism. What happens once you've taken a very individualized, materialistic view of the world? You're kind of stuck there. You're in a cul-de-sac, basically. And for some of us, that's just not good enough. So, Eddie, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show here. This has been such a pleasure, bud.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me on.
Wonderful. So for those interested, I really want you to go to the show notes for this one. I have some really great books. The ones that I'm going to be up at the very top for the show notes, 3 books in particular, they're great. I had a fantastic time. I had way more fun researching this stuff than I thought I was going to. Please check those out. The show notes are at whatmagicisthis.com. Also there, I have a link to my Instagram account, my Twitter account, and my Facebook account. Eddie, you're on Instagram. I'd like to put up a link to your page if possible.
If you just want to see random memes and pictures of me and my dog.
Your dog is great.
He's mad at me because I'm not paying attention to him.
Oh, poor guy.
My Instagram is at Yeti and Abe.
Perfect. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. If you guys like the show, please tell a friend. Word of mouth is probably the best way that I get my show to spread around. So if you tell a friend that you like this weird podcast about magic, hopefully they'll tell a friend, and then they'll tell a friend. And that's just kind of how these things snowball. Also, if you enjoy the podcast, there's something fun. That's actually, I had Eddie on the show for not just this reason, but the very first review for my podcast was Eddie.
Yeah, and wow, that was a long time ago and a lot of episodes later. And I'd like to congratulate you on the success that you've had.
Thank you, Eddie.
It's really awesome to see podcasts that I just happened upon, randomly searching for something, and to being a guest almost a year and a half later.
Yeah. You said some great stuff in the review. You basically said, off to a great start. It's like, oh, thank you. So look at us now. Thank you so much for the kind words. And from the get-go, you've always been very supportive of my work. And you pop in every once in a while to check in. And it's been wonderful to have you on this a bit of a journey. Yeah, it's been really fantastic. So thank you for being the first to leave a review on iTunes for What Magic Is This, Eddie.
I'm proof positive that you kiss somebody's butt, you get on their podcast.
There you go.
Thank you again, Doug.
For sure, Eddie. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a review either on iTunes or on Stitcher, any place. People do read those reviews. And so if you can leave one, that would be much appreciated. If you enjoy the show and you want to support it, I have got a Patreon. It can be found at patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. Head there and you can sign up. It's only $7 a month. I don't have any tiers. Eddie is a patron as well. Are you enjoying what I'm putting up there, Eddie?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I love getting the notifications. So, yeah.
I do quite a few notifications for my Patreon content. So I'm actively there. If you want to see a bit more of the kind of magic that really, really interests me, you're going to get that through the Patreon. So there's the regular podcast. It's all well and good. But if you want to support that podcast, head to the Patreon and you're going to get even more stuff. I do things about deities and what I do with my magic. I just released an episode about what to do with, if you have 24 hours to do magic, what I would do. That was about an hour and a half long episode. So there's your full episodes. But at base, if you want to support the show and you think that I'm doing something cool, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, $7 a month. That is all I'm asking. And you get lots of extra material and access to a Discord server as well. If you don't like the whole Patreon thing, you just want to throw me a couple of shekels, I've got a PayPal me. It's on whatmagicisthis.com. Just hit one of the PayPal buttons. You can send me $5, $10, $20, $200. Any amount helps, but you're not going to get the Patreon content. If you want that, you have to go to Patreon. That's it. All of those things can be available at whatmagicisthis.com. Head there, check out the show notes, and all of that fun stuff. Eddie, man, this has been so much fun. I learned a ton, and if I was to ask you to come back on the show, I really hope you'd come back on.
Oh, in a heartbeat. Oh, in a heartbeat.
Perfect.
So,
I really... Oh, there's the dog. I was just about to say.
Abers, come here.
Abe. Yes.
Hi, buddy. I would get him in the screen, but he's too fat to jump up.
Oh, well. Eddie has a wonderful dog named Abe, and head to his Instagram. You can see great pictures of Abe and of Eddie just really enjoying themselves. That's all for the show, everybody. I really hope that you learned something about Satanism. I know that I did in research for this episode and with having Eddie on. So with that, I want you all to get your robes on, light a few candles, get out your dagger, and throw some naked bodies everywhere. But until then, I want you all to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. Eddie, could we get a goodbye from you?
Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Wonderful. And with that, stay well, everybody. We'll talk at you soon. Bye-bye.